Thank you so much for watching. It is a pleasure to introduce to you this week our lovely Mary. And Mary is a mum, and she's one of 10.
1 of 10. Actually, when I saw 1 of 9 appear, like the very first time I saw it, I was like, I know exactly what she means.
I wonder if anyone else. I wonder if people even know what it meant anyway.
I feel like unless you're part of that dynamic, you wouldn't. I would always say I'm 1 of 10 or 1 of, you know, like it was
Part
just,
of your identity?
Yeah. So I knew exactly what you meant.
Mary, are you enjoying the channel?
Loving it. So one of the things that I really love about the channel is the variety of women and the difference in their lives and in their experience. Because I think, especially when it comes to raising your family or raising them in the faith, there is this temptation to try to look for very clear solutions, almost a guidebook. And I think sometimes that can actually lead to a lot of damage, because we're not called to live life the way someone else is called to live it. We're called to live it the way we're called to live it. And so if a woman, for instance, is tempted to think, you know, she must have 10 children and homeschool all of them, or, you know, that, you know, I mean, there's a variety of paths that you could go down. I think that trying to live someone else's calling, I mean, never ends up being anything but damaging, really. And so what I see in the channel is just this variety of this great variety of women and families, and all living these beautiful lives, all really pursuing holiness, but doing it in like their own ways and in their own circumstances and with their own strengths and limitations. And so what you see is there's not a, you know, a black and white guidebook. There are guideposts, but there's not one way that your life should be looking. And I think that that's really, really valuable, because as people are searching for answers and ways forward, to know that actually, well, maybe I just have to discern for myself personally, like take it to God and talk to him about it. What does he want from me?
So Mary is married to Marcos, and they have 2 gorgeous children, Eleanor and Sebastian. And you're living here south of London. And Mary, tell us, how did you get here? Because you're from Canada?
I am.
You are?
Well, I was born in California. Then we moved to Canada when I was 4 or 5, I can't remember.
And you've arrived in London.
Yes.
Marcos is not English.
No, he's Spanish. After university, I had spent my like entire university years like really sick on and off, and so I was like leaving school, going back to school, leaving school,
and you call university school, is that right?
Yeah. And so I had reached this point where I was just like, I have basically just been surviving. Like I don't, like it just felt like I was treading water, trying not to drown, but I had no sense of like, of myself aside from like just really, really trying to like survive how difficult life had been. And I just had this moment where a few things came together, where I'd been offered a job working for this like homeschooling company. I could be wherever I wanted to. All I needed was my laptop and the internet. I was working one day and I thought like, oh my gosh, I don't have to be here. I could be anywhere. Probably because I had been sort of raised on classics. I'd had this like fascination with Greece. So I like typed...
Were you home educated?
No. Well, a little bit through high school, because I was, again, sick so often, so it was just easier. It was just sort of like part of my childhood and part of the dialogue of our home. So I was fascinated with Greece, and I just kind of like, I didn't even know how I found it, but I found this like little cottage on the Peloponnesus, and I reserved it for 3 months, and I bought a plane ticket, and I told my parents, and then I left. And so I went to the Peloponnesus. It's like the last untouched part of Greece. Women wearing like little kerchiefs and like pulling donkeys, and like the village I was outside of had no cards. So I like went into the pharmacy one day, and she said, I don't take cards. And I had to walk to the next village 2 hours away to pull cash out of the only cash machine there. So I wound up there. I remember landing in Athens, getting out of the airport. I didn't speak Greek, and I didn't have a phrase book. Like I had no way of communicating where I wanted to go. So I had like my hotel reservation, and I just sort of like handed it to him and like prayed that I would make it there, and that was it. just working in the afternoons because I was working North American hours. So I would start work mid-afternoon and work into the early evening. And at about the 3-month mark, I decided I wasn't ready to go home yet. And so I found a place in southern France. Same kind of situation, just like a little cottage outside of a little town. It was in between moving from Greece to France that I ended up meeting Marcos. And he was working in London. He's basically rooted here. And that was almost 10 years ago. Dad's friend, who's a Baptist minister, went to visit my grandpa to be like, let's talk about your soul, like as you're getting older, you're sick, whatever. My grandpa was like, he didn't understand the concept of sin, really. Like, he was just like, I'm a good guy. I don't understand why I would need to talk about like sin or the things I've done wrong or my soul or anything like that. And fast forward a few months, and he's dying in the hospital. And my dad calls Father. Yeah, you can hide those. And he says, like, my dad is dying. Just start praying. And he said, well, I'm going to come and see him. And it's like a 4-hour flight. And my dad was like, no, like, I don't think you're going to make it. Wow. Like, whatever. Like, don't do it. And Father's like, no, I'm coming. So as Father's flying across Canada, my grandpa goes into a coma. And my dad was like, what are you? Grandpa's in a coma. They're in the hospital. Father comes straight from the airport to the hospital room, and he walks into the room, and my grandpa sits up and he goes, hi, Father, how are you? And Father goes, he's like, hi, Woody, how are you doing? And my grandpa's like, oh, not so good. And Father's like, well, do you want to have a chat? And my grandpa goes, yeah. And he like waves my dad out of the room, tells everyone to go out of the room. And my dad comes back later. Father's sitting by the bed. My grandpa's back in a coma. But Father had basically sat down and said, I'm a Catholic priest, I can hear confessions and I can forgive sins. Would you like to do that? And he was like, yeah, I would. This priest actually used to give retreats for like Carmelite nuns. And he was telling him about my grandpa, like he's just not open to any of this. And the nun said, well, you just need to pray for grace. That's it. You just need to pray for the grace. Yeah. And it's like, there's that thing, like at the moment, as you're dying and the moment before death, you're flooded with as much like grace as you would need to like, it's like your last chance. Yeah.
Thank God. And then did he die shortly after?
Yeah, he slipped into a coma, never woke up again, and died.
Great hope in that story.
Yeah. One of my friends is like super distressed about all of I keep trying to tell her like it's not all bad. Like there's these amazing men who really do believe. And who are like,
and that's why it's so important for men to be just really strong in their faith. Yeah. And like your dad, who wasn't Catholic.
He was Catholic initially. So he was born. He was baptized,
but wasn't practicing.
He left the church when he was 13
because his dad isn't Catholic, and so there's a huge thing. Isn't it? It's like 2% of people whose dads aren't Catholic will follow it on from even.
Yeah. So none of his brothers.
Oh, lovely shoes, Mary.
Oh, thanks. Home after 6 months of being away. I took Marcos with me, and I arrived into the airport with the Spaniard.
And Mary, you're the oldest of the 10, so this is you are huge. You're really paving the way for the family. Okay, so you met Marcos. What was your first date? Where did you even have your first date?
We met in Paris, in a train station. The really quick story is, before I left for Greece, one of my friends got married. Very worried for me that I wasn't dating anyone because she was so happy. I'm not ready to meet someone. Leave me alone. But she said, I'm just going to set up this Catholic match profile. Series of questions that you have to answer. And I was really grumpy. One-line answers. The most bare bones profile I've ever seen. Not my real name, no picture. Not really sure what I'm looking for. I know what I don't want. Don't want to meet someone online. Fast forward 3 months. I'm in Greece. And I get these notifications, message waiting for me. Bought a month's subscription so that I could read this message, and it was Marcos. We exchanged a couple emails and then nothing. Didn't respond to one email and whatever. Like, that was fine. I wasn't interested, really. But then I fast forward a few weeks and he sends me another message and he says, I really liked talking to you. Do you want to keep chatting? And I was sort of like, I don't know. I haven't been talking to anyone, really. I might as well talk to you. He asked me what I was doing and I told him I was packing up to go to this small town in the south of France. And he goes, well, it's really easy to get from London to Paris. So why don't I meet you for coffee the day that you're there?
Wow.
I said, okay, fine. And we met in the locker rooms of Austerlitz train station and had a 45-minute or an hour-long coffee. He just started talking. We barely knew each other, so the common ground is sort of family life in a sense. So he starts talking about his family, and he has all of these siblings, and all of his siblings have all of these children, and I have all of these siblings, blah, blah, blah. And about half an hour into the conversation, I thought, if he's not lying about all of this, I think I'm going to marry him. Which was just wild. Like, just sort of like...
So before you met him, what did you think?
Completely indifferent. No thought whatsoever, really.
And now, half an hour, 45 minutes into a coffee day in Paris.
Yeah.
It's quite romantic.
It is. He came to visit me a few times when I was in France, and then when I went back to Calgary.
So did you talk about marriage early on?
Pretty early on, 2.5 years to get married. But I think it's a difficult thing when you're doing a long distance relationship part of the time, because you don't spend time together and you don't know each other in that way of sort of the just ins and out of normal life.
And did you pray through it? Did you always keep your faith from childhood?
I did. And I think that was a great
That is
grace.
a great thing that your mum and dad have done for their first child.
Yeah. No,
well done them.
It's been a bit, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they are a huge part of it, and then I think I just think at key points in my life I encountered people who helped me, and at moments when I could have just walked away, there was always someone there. I definitely consider it a great grace, and sort of like this, for me it just feels like God has very obviously worked in my life in like ways that I would be silly to question.
This sort of thing doesn't just happen. What do you think maybe fueled you to this, to be able to go out, and it almost feels like it was like put on a plate for you in a way?
Yeah.
It wasn't you going out seeking it, you weren't sort of desperately praying for something.
No. So I mean, there's a few things I think. So I think our faith was always lived in the home. Like we always went to Sunday mass. My parents usually went to daily mass. Our faith was obvious, like lived in the home, and especially as I grew older, my parents were doing more and more things. Like I would wake up and my dad, he would be doing his like spiritual reading in the morning and just praying by himself. Another thing that I really do have to factor in is my temperament. I am very much inclined to sort of be more spiritual, I guess.
My mommy.
Yes, that's amazing. And so all of those things of the faith were attractive, naturally attractive to me. But then I think also on top of that was the fact that I was really sick from a very young age, and the only way to have a framework for suffering was within basically the Catholic understanding of suffering, like of its redemptive nature, because otherwise it just feels like you're being tortured.
Fun, leave it then. It's a bit of fun. Play with it.
Not too much fun.
Yeah.
No. When I was around 11, 12, I have Crohn's disease, and I was really, really sick at that point, like in the hospital for a really long time, in and out of school, on horrendous medications. And there was a point at which it was just the physical suffering was immense and the mental suffering was immense, and I was young and didn't have the life that any of my peers had. And I remember...
So this was affecting you day to day?
Like weeks on end, months on. At one point I think I missed like 5 weeks of school. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. I didn't eat for a month. It was heavy. There was always the threat of like surgery to take out the entire colon. I remember once a doctor coming in and showing me, we think you might have to prepare for this, which was to be literally put a tube in your mouth and shove it into your stomach to like directly deliver food, basically be fed by tubes. And it's, you're whatever, 12 years old, and it's like, I'm never gonna have a normal life ever. So there's the physical side, but then there's the mental side of all of that, and it just felt like I was sinking and sinking and sinking. One day, my dad was going on retreat for the weekend. I got a call from him from the retreat center, and he said, Mary, why don't you come on over because Father wants to talk to you. It was this priest who I'd been going to confession with once a month since I was very young. And I was like, no, like I was tired, I was fed up. I was just sort of like, why does, I don't want to go anywhere. And my dad just insisted. And so my mom drove me over there, and Father was waiting for me, and I went to sit down with him. He said, Mary, I know, you're really suffering a lot, and I know it's really, really hard. But I just want you to think about something. And I was like, okay. And he said, I just want you to picture Jesus on his way to Calvary. And he's reached the limits of his endurance, and he's looking through the crowds for someone to help him. And he sees your face, and he knows you will. And he said, that's what you're doing. You're helping. And that was like this pivotal moment where all of a sudden I had context for suffering, and I had something to do with it, and it wasn't a punishment. It was this great privilege. It was like the work of redemption. Really? That's amazing.
There's a gorgeous picture of you, Eleanor. It's really gorgeous. Thanks for showing the children.
I wouldn't have a framework for my life, or even the ability to live through my life if I didn't have faith. It wouldn't make sense to me.
Was that automatic? As soon as the priest spoke to you, this made sense?
It was just like my whole, everything shifted.
Suffering was your most intimate call to holiness.
Basically. And I often think, there's this quote from C.S. Lewis, pain is God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world. And I think I'm an incredibly stubborn personality, and I think in many ways, like, this is the only way he could grab me. Like, this is the only way he could make me just give myself to him. And if I had been a milder, more malleable personality, maybe I wouldn't have had to encounter suffering in the ways that I have. But I did, because it almost feels like because it was that direct and insistent invitation to just become extraordinarily intimate with him.
Initially, you felt really moved and honoured to journey with Jesus in this way.
Yeah.
Did this sustain you?
I was thinking the other day, God has been very good to me and worked in like brutally obvious ways in my life, I think, because I needed it. As in, subtlety wouldn't work for whatever reason.
So having that priest in your life, is this something that you would want for your children? Because having that priest in your life has helped to shape ultimately your parents' children. It's easy to say and see a priest after Mass, hi, bye.
He was the experience of God's love. I remember once, a few years after that, I was really struggling with something again. And he said, "Do you believe I love you?" And I said, "Yeah." The priest said this. He said, "Good." And he said, "But it's nothing compared to how God loves you. This is a little slice of that. The care I have for you, how I want the best for you, how well I know you, how you could never say anything that would shock me. But that's nothing." I mean, the thing is with my dad, knowing me, obviously the depths of my struggle, caring and then seeing what it is I might need, and also the sort of humility to sort of like pass me on to someone else, to the priest. These experiences of fatherly love have been absolutely crucial.
Oh my goodness.
A little bit.
They do fit you a little bit. Where's Daddy?
Playing test all day.
When I was younger, I had like really bad asthma. So every winter I would basically wake up and he would be sitting next to my bed watching me breathe. And as soon as I woke up, he would say, "No, we have to go to the hospital." 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. and sit next to me. And I have this one clear memory of I needed to go into this oxygen tent that was like basically like a bed covered in plastic sheeting pumped with oxygen. And for whatever reason, I was like really scared of this. And
How old are you?
7, 8, 9, I'm not sure. Yeah. And I said, I can't do this, I can't do this. And I was just really scared, and he said, "I'll hold your hand and I won't leave you." And so he put his hand under the edge of the tent and he just held my hand, and I fell asleep, and I woke up hours later and he was still sitting in the chair next to me, like this hard metal chair. And so I think this sort of like the constancy of that, to be always there when you needed it. I do think that, you know, when he calls up and he says, "Father wants to see you. Would you come?" It's not the sort of intrusion of the person who just sort of comes in and out of your life. Again, connected to like Crohn's and illness and whatever. When I was 13, my doctor handed me a pamphlet on infertility and he said, "You just have to be aware of this. This is probably where you're headed. Just start wrapping your mind around this." He had no bedside manner, to be honest. And at 13, it was kind of like, okay, like you're not really thinking that far forward into the future. When I was about 19, they did a lot of, I was having some really harsh issues. I had a bunch of like fertility testing done, or hormonal testing, endocrine testing. I had the hormones of like a premenopausal woman basically, and the doctor, she worked with Creighton and Napro. She knew her stuff, and she said, "You're probably never going to get pregnant, but if you do, you're probably not going to sustain a pregnancy." And so this was at 19.
That's a harder hit.
That was a really hard hit. And then, but the hardest hit came a week afterwards when I was in Mass. We were at church. There was a luncheon afterwards, and there were a group of us at this table, some of them young moms, some of them single, whatever. Everyone was talking about children, family life, whatever. And I said something like, "If I have kids," because it had really changed to an if. And someone interjected and said, "What do you mean if? You know you're not supposed to do anything that would prevent you from having children. You don't know anything, number one. And number two, you're making like a radical assumption here." It was then that there was this sort of awareness of you're winning at Catholic life if you have, the more kids you have, and it's a contest. As time went on, I began to encounter more and more women who had these really hard experiences of multiple miscarriages. I had one friend who had something like 6 miscarriages back to back. I'm at this interesting intersection, which is I'm from a very large family, and I can see the beauty of big family life, and I really appreciate it. And then this sort of very deep awareness of the other end of the spectrum, where children don't come easily, and they might not come at all. Seeing that there's a great divide between the two camps, and how hugely unfortunate that is, because I think as sort of a reaction to the culture around us, the church, or many people in the church, will sort of uphold these big families and really sort of praise them and glorify them, and which, of course, it's a very difficult thing. It's an act of heroism. I can never say enough good things, but the flip side can be that if that's not a possibility, there can be a sense of judgment attached to a situation that is actually brutally difficult. In a sense, I consider myself fortunate to sort of be at that intersection. And also, something that I've really encountered in myself is this whole concept of spiritual motherhood, and that the very nature of our being, like the fact that all women have wombs that create a space for children, that because we're a unity of our body and soul, that in our natures, one of the gifts that we have is that we create space for others. We can see their need, and we create a space for that and try to meet and fulfill whatever the need is. And what I think it does is it gives a whole lot of direction and space to women who might not have children, or might have one child and be longing for more.
So a maternity that looks different for everyone.
For everyone.
And not one
uniquely
is
personal.
Yes.
Yes.
Uniquely personal.
Yes. And I think that we need to be more aware. You can be living your motherhood to the fullest. And it could look like one child, and it could look like 10 children. Motherhood is in a weird place, and I feel like it's the way motherhood is looked at is it makes it so much more difficult for the lived reality of motherhood, which is it's the constancy of the needs of little ones, and how if you don't watch yourself, you end up with nothing left. And the little ones suffer as a result. If the real needs of mothers aren't attended to in like genuine, realistic, workable ways, everything falls apart as a result of that.
I met Peter, and he said that when the mum's happy, the family's happy. And
Absolutely.
I thought, wow, I love this guy. Great.
Absolutely, yeah.
But then I really did see it.
Yeah.
I did see it in action. And also interesting what you were saying about our fertility, because in a way I had this fertility problem when I had Alani and I was a single mum, because I couldn't produce more children without having a husband. And I felt also this it's the details of how we have to love and using our maternity.
Yeah.
And I thought I still must love and mother whoever it is, whether it's the homeless man on the street, or if it's my sister, or if it's the children in my class, or the adult, or whoever it is at whatever age. As a mother in my maternity, I'm to love, and like nuns. And I thought, I still just must love, and I must love with this great gift of my maternity.
Yeah, mothers through the age of 3 are the ones primarily and beautifully suited to regulating the emotional lives of their children. Children cannot regulate their emotions. Definitely not before 18 months. They can't even begin, but up to the age of 3, they don't have that capability. And it's the mom who does that for them, who comes and like brings down their stress response. And I just think there's something like absolutely like diabolical going on when motherhood is so sort of shoved to the side, and it's what you do sort of like as an afterthought. Because if you take this one incident, this one example of a mother and a child, and the mother regulating the stress levels of her child, and you blow that up to global proportions, mothers regulate the emotional health of the world. The hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. Like, that's true on a fundamental biological level. We do such a disservice when we pull women away from that.
Thank you so much for chatting with us today. It's actually really fired me up for our channel and for sharing all of these stories of all of these lives and people and how they're living their maternity, whether they are single, seeking their vocation, they're married, they're nuns, they're religious, wherever it is, and how how we can, as women,
live out motherhood, right?
Live out our motherhood and live out our vocation, and thank God for each other and where we are and what we can do because of it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mary. God bless.
Each episode is a huge amount of work. And I wouldn't be sat here doing it if it weren't for those that are already supporting the channel. Just a few more seconds of this very hypnotic music before I suggest making a monthly pledge to support the channel and keep it going.